Welcome everyone to our podcast. This is the Art School Graduates Podcast. My name is Justin
Yeah.
Robinson.
And I'm Badir McCleary. And for the first podcast, our opening podcast, Justin, we got some good stuff for everyone.
Oh, yes, most definitely.
Just
Yes.
one of the things that we've identified in the podcast space, and I know you brought it to me, was that there weren't too many people that look like us in the space. So we had to make sure this podcast, picked up a little bit of slack in that area. What do you think?
I have to agree with you. When I approached you for this conversation, you were very much on board and you were like, you know what? I've noticed that same thing too. So I was like, perfect. We are both experts in it. We've lived it. We've crossed
Yes,
paths in
sir.
this. And so I feel very confident that the information and the news and conversation we're going to have is going to be very strong. It's going to be thought provoking for some people.
Oh yes, oh yes. And the best part about it is that, like you said, we've been through the process. We have the paper, we have the
Yep.
experience and the scars to prove it. And also,
Absolutely.
we get a chance to add some premium conversation um to the platform, and also just to add some really good ideas and make, like you said, make people think a bit about what's going on in the art world from a perspective that they usually don't get.
Yeah,
Um
and I think what works for us is that we're on two polar opposite sides of the art world,
mhm.
but we always meet in the middle of practice. So with my
Yes.
background in education and being a fine artist myself, and with your background in the business and in the
Mhm.
curational aspect of it, it just it's just a perfect mesh. It's like we lived in the
Yeah.
same house of art, but we've just were roommates. We were in different rooms.
Exactly. And that's what makes it cool, because we won't give a one-sided perspective. We can always take a look at, an idea or a story from materials and a practice perspective, but also from a business and a market perspective, because we both
Yes.
have experience in looking. And I think for our listeners, that would really, really help.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so yeah, without further ado, let's, jump in it.
Yes.
We got some really good conversation today. And to start off with, like we mentioned, why this podcast is necessary.
Mhm.
Justin, you want to give them a preview of that?
Uh, for one, the main reason to me why this podcast is necessary is representation for people of color.
Yes.
Um, as I listen to podcasts, I digest them, I view them, and I listen to them. And when it comes time for me to hear another perspective, our voice isn't there, or it's
Hmm.
very little, it's minute. And
Minimal.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. So I just felt that we live in this culture. We
Hmm.
are the culture, and our stories are just as powerful. We don't need others to
Yeah.
tell our story. We live it so we can
Yeah.
tell our story better. Like I feel like
Most
that's
definitely.
one reason why. What about you?
Yeah. And to add on to that is that, like, there's always this narrative of, there needs to be, like you said, someone to tell the story for us, when the conversation or the relationship of that story comes much better from, quote unquote, the horse's mouth. And it's
Yes.
not that we don't have the education, because as we said, we've had the papers and the education to prove that we know what we're talking about.
Mhm.
It's just also having that opportunity,
Yes.
that opportunity to actually speak and be heard is very, very important for the African American voice, the voice of color, and also the male voice of color
Mm.
in the art world. So yeah, like, we want to just dive deep into a little bit of background into that, and just kind of let folks know that they may be dealing with this, that we're here to talk about it. We're here to bring
Yes.
some awareness to it.
Yes.
And actually talk about some of these experiences. So
Hmm.
yeah, let's jump on it.
Yes.
So we've been able to gather some really good information to start with.
Mhm.
Justin, you found some amazing information that really sets the tone for this conversation. What did we find that was really interesting?
Well, so as we were trying to figure out what our first show was going to be about, we we had practice, we've talked about it, and then it finally came down to us just, explaining why we're doing this
Hmm.
show and why our representation is needed. And the way I'm coming to this is as a professor. I'm an adjunct professor at two different universities. I love it, and I think it's a great way for students to experience people of color is
Hmm.
at the higher level, so they can see that we're not just what media portrays us to be. We are also
Exactly.
educators. We are also creators. We are also like just phenomenal people. And so
Yes, we are.
in
Magic.
my right, and in my search for like just information, I was just curious, and I was like, I want to know like how many people of color actually are in
Hmm.
higher education, because I'm a high school teacher, so I know that number and what that looks like, but I want to know what's the number for representation at the higher academia, college, the JC, the 4 years. And so on National Center for Educational Statistics, it's a government site. Uh, I was kind of floored, man, but I wasn't
Hmm.
surprised. I wasn't surprised. 5% of representation in universities total were black females, and 3% were black males. And I was like, that can't be right. So I just took it upon myself to like keep digging and keep looking. And so I looked
Hmm.
again, and it was like I found another site that said, demographics for art professors nationally. We make up
Hmm.
17% as our counterparts make up
Wow.
79%. And I was like,
Wow.
dang. And that's just in
Yeah, that's
college. So that's why
huge.
I was like,
Yeah.
ooh,
Yeah,
man.
and when I think about that, like, at in the grad program at Sotheby's and at Claremont, which I had the honor to attend, I was the only black male in my class, and I think it was two to three other black females. Um, and those numbers are actually pretty accurate, because even when you look at grad school programs in general, I think that number is it's getting better, but I think that number is there. And one of those things that, especially in LA, one of the main things that come up with that is, the finance.
Yeah,
How much does finance play a role in being able to obtain higher education, to
right,
be able to be placed or to accept roles in these, prominent institutions or corporate
right.
companies, to where, a lot of, and not just people of color, but a lot of Americans just aren't privy to the financial opportunities that will lead to an opportunity there. I mean, I was lucky to, have an opportunity to go there, to be able to pay for it, to be able to do the undergrad thing. So I understand, the burden, that
Yeah,
it could be. But,
yeah,
I mean, still, even with, paying off loans and things like that now. Um, but it was very interesting to not necessarily only see the few black students, but there weren't any black professors, adding
yeah,
to your point.
yeah,
So it made me think, like, where do I fit in, in
yeah.
all of this?
Can I share a funny story with you?
Please,
So during
please.
my MFA program, I was right along there with you. I was the only
Mhm.
black male there. We had one black female there too. Luckily, we were in the same cohort, so we rocked with each other. So it made it so much.
Facts.
It was like a blessing
It
in
makes it
disguise, but
better. Yeah,
it
it
was
makes it
cool.
better.
It was like, oh, I see someone that looks like me. But it was a great experience, and I can tell you, on the first night there, I was ready to
Hmm.
quit. I literally
Mm.
walked outside and sat down, and I was like, I don't belong here. Like I almost had that
Damn.
imposter syndrome, because it's like
Yes.
I'm looking at what everyone else is doing and everyone else's background and what everyone else is creating, and I'm like, my background is graffiti, and everybody's like,
Hmm.
oh, but everyone else is like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm a photographer, I'm a sculptor, I'm a painter, I'm a illustrator,
Yeah.
and it's just like, I'm a printmaker, and I'm like, I make graffiti letters and make dope prints, like, and I
Did you
felt like,
feel really quickly, did you
yeah,
feel like you were about to be, like undertaking something that you couldn't handle?
100%,
Mm.
100%. I did,
Mm.
and I literally went outside and I called my mom, and I was like, I don't belong here. I told her that. I said, Mom,
Mm,
I don't belong here. I was like, the work they're making, it was like overwhelming for me. And for me, I don't get
mm,
overwhelmed that much. But
yeah.
that was my first experience to being like, oh, this is a lot. And luckily my mom was like, you only applied to one school and you got into that one
Mhm.
school. She was like, there's a reason for you to be there. See it through. So I
Yes.
sought it through, and I ended up making one of the greatest decisions ever, because it's like I had to take that team mentality and just buy in, even though don't
Hmm.
know the coaches, new to the school, don't know the players. I'm gonna buy in and just see what happens.
Yeah.
And I ended up coming out with like a phenomenal thesis show that to this day people still like ask me about it. And when I show my
Yeah.
students in my college classes, they are like, wait, you did this? And I was like, yeah. And I show them
Hmm.
where I started to where I came from.
Yeah.
And I was like, to where I'm at, forgive me, they were
Yeah.
like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, that's a completely different thing that you were doing. And so I felt
Yes.
very blessed to have experienced that. But not a lot of people get that chance to experience these things. You know what I mean? Like, they don't get
Most
to
definitely.
feel that like uneasiness and just push through, because like most times people get that uneasiness and they just stop, you know?
Yeah.
And
Stopping and ghosting is a big thing because people are nervous,
huge,
stage fright, a
huge.
stage fright in a sense. Like, my approach, or not my approach, but my experience, my first experience in grad school was somewhat of the same thing, but in a sense, a little bit of the flip side, because
Mhm.
the reason I went to grad school, and a grad school like Sotheby's in Claremont, was because I had owned a gallery at the time. I was working with artists. I was working with collectors and things like that. But there was a language barrier. I
Mm.
felt between me and the people I were dealing with, because of course I'm trying to climb a little bit higher. I had just taken a group of artists from my program to the fair for the first
Yeah.
year. So I was experiencing all this new stuff, and new people
Hmm.
were bringing up different levels of vocabulary that I just kind of wasn't used to at first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm looking like, oh man, like, what does all this mean? So it was like, yo, like, this level, if I'm going to be managing and dealing with people's
Uh-huh.
careers, I need a higher level of education, to where their trust in me is a little bit more, because they know I've been through the gauntlet,
Yes.
in a
Yes.
sense. So I expected me to walk in and feel exactly the way you did. But in a sense, it was opposite. Like, I was coming in as, more of the person that had experience. And a lot of my classmates had experience as well. I can mention a few of them that, had worked at museums, before, or had done some consulting for a public art project or performance art project. So there was some background, but I would say 80, maybe 75, 80% of the attendees of that cohort, this was them leaving their undergrad, jumping into something brand new. So
Oh.
the experiences that I was privy to, of just,
Mhm.
hitting the ground running by owning the space, they were learning about it via book. So I would sit in the class a little bit and be like, okay, I
Yeah.
know this firsthand. So
Yeah.
I would take the lessons and almost like a checks and balances,
Yeah.
to see where my mistakes were, during my process.
Mm.
And I'll never forget my one teacher, Jay Prag. Prag, if you're listening, I always show you love for this, but he was able to show me how to put my gallery into numbers. And what I mean by that was, to go inside the business and actually bring out, some measurement points.
Mhm.
And those are the type of skill sets that you get in a graduate program that
Mhm.
allow you to take a lead curatorial position, to analyze the numbers of how you need things, to look at a higher level. Um, and I looked at that as the goal for me getting the information. So I just wanted to share that little. I don't want to run on too crazy, but it just was, those polar opposite experiences of,
Yes. Yes.
going
Yes.
into a grad school, and like, you can have, so many different ones. It's never one track, is
Right.
all I should
Right.
say.
Right. Right. Yeah. Totally. I agree with you, and I think that's why this podcast needs to be needs to be held. Like we need to have this just off of that,
Yeah.
because our stories are very similar, but one was fine art and the other was business. So it's just like,
Mhm.
okay. And we both had that same feeling and the same uncomfortableness. And we were just like, man, wow, like that's crazy.
Yeah. I got a quick question that leads kind of like into both of our things. Do you think curatorial relies on arts education? And if so, how much?
Ooh.
I think
I would
that's a
have to
good the
agree.
good question to start with.
Yeah, yeah, I would have to agree because um knowing what you're looking at helps you to, as a curator, decipher what the
Mhm,
person's trying to do. So
mhm,
it almost helps you create their artist statement for your gallery or for your show. And
yeah.
for a fine artist, I believe it allows you to have the language, as you were saying, like have that language of how to properly speak about it. I was a complete novice. I'm coming
Mhm,
in with no educational background in fine art except with
yeah.
graphic design. So when I'm talking about going to get my master's and showing in art galleries, I didn't know how to speak of it, you know? And
Mhm,
so that I
mhm.
think that intimidated me more, because it's just like, oh, I don't know how to speak about this, this very prestigious thing that's been held in such high regard. And so I think that's what intimidated me. But once I bought in and I learned it, going into galleries and talking to people, it just it enlightened them and it enlightened myself, because it's like they look
Mhm.
at you and then they're like, huh, oh, so he does know what he's talking
Yeah.
about. Okay, yeah, let me see your work. Let me
Yeah.
see your portfolio. And then it almost like lets everybody's guard down, because you're not
Mhm.
coming in with like um you're not coming in with that uh attitude of like, yo, I can paint, give me a space. it's more
Yeah,
of
yeah.
it's more of,
Like the
hey,
DM, look at my art.
yes, yeah, look at my art, like check this out. But it's more of that the formality of it, of being very like, hey, can I sit down with you, can I present something to you? This is the area of where I'm working in, and the reason I'm working there is because
Mhm,
of this. I look to this artist as like as a reference or as a guide, or this is the artist that has influenced my work. And that
mhm.
shows people that you're not this just regular Joe Blow. You actually are bringing
Yeah,
something valuable to the table that they can possibly partner with to like grow their gallery, bring
exactly.
attention to them too. So yeah, I would say yes.
Exactly.
I think education is needed on both parts, because it's just pivotal. It will be a very pivotal thing to, I
Yeah.
believe, possibly help succeed some galleries,
Mhm.
or it could possibly tank your gallery. That's my take on it.
Mm.
What is yours? What do you think
Yeah,
about it?
I agree. I think, just for coherence sake, if anything, knowing what you're talking about works. You know what I mean? But the curatorial aspect of, education, I don't think that it's, let's say, like a necessity. Yes,
Mhm.
being educated is important, never doubting education. But I think in today's curatorial world, being able to understand, the placement and how
Mhm.
things organize is a gift, that
Right.
I think that comes in a sense naturally, just like how with creativity, there are some
Mhm.
things that come naturally and it's refined, by, that education or that higher learning aspect. I think that same thing with curatorial. I think that a lot of people, they can come in. I mean, you see people that can dress, you see people that can
Mhm.
put together a music playlist, that see people that can draw connections between items,
Yeah.
objects, arrays of lists, whatever it is, bringing that primary key together. But I also think, like, when we speak of higher education, there's that level or that question of why these things go together. And
Hmm.
being able to explain that why,
Mhm.
I think is a tip in the cap for Black
Mhm.
cure specifically, because there's a lot of shows to where that relationship of why, you
Yes.
know, it goes a little bit further. Um,
Yes.
you see situations where, or perfect example, if you ever seen someone's artwork via social media, as we all have, or via a
Yes.
picture, it's never the same when you see that work in person. You
Absolutely.
know,
I have to
when
agree
you
with you.
get a yeah, when you get a chance to finally see that, it's there. And this is where I mean with, you know, the innateness of curatorial. Um, by seeing posts of, a fully thought out exhibition or whatever, it's good, but actually talking to the curator and getting the background, you really have an opportunity of digging deeper, because what he or she talks about has so much more than what the space sometimes offers.
It
So
informs the
being able to,
work.
yes, yes, it
It informs
informs
it.
the work. Because there's sometimes there's not an educational component that they
No.
can explain, but there's a personal component that they
Yes.
can explain. So what do you
Yes.
think? What do you think? How do you think that relationship adds to the educational component, or creates an island for itself without it?
Well, I can see I've seen it from both sides of working at a not working in a working in a gallery when I was
Mm-hmm.
hanging a show, because it was just I it was a group show, so I was splitting half of the gallery, and so one had uh, an artist's piece, and mine were in the back, and I was totally okay with that because of what my pieces were intended to do. Like my
Mm-hmm.
pieces, I purposely chose it because I wanted you to be in that space. I wanted you to
Mm-hmm.
feel like what the sayings were, what was being portrayed in front of you. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was a fun conversation when I was working with the gallerist, because he was like, "You have a dynamic show." And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, "I'm sorry we had to put you with hers, but it was because it was more of like expressionist painting, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
But when we had
Yeah.
our artist talk for the show, the conversation fell off for her because
Mm.
understanding the power of making a mark. Like you
Yeah.
can't just be like there's something behind it. You can't just be like, yeah, I just kind of was like
Which a lot of people do, like,
yeah,
they get
yeah,
in there because people are trying to find a way.
yeah, yeah. And I think what worked for me was there's an actual story to it. When people
Mhm.
when people walked in there, some felt sad, some felt anger, some felt this, some were like, well, why would you make that? Or why would you say things like that? Or how can you put this out there? And so
Mhm.
I think that with that happening, it helped the curator to be like, this is why he did this. This is where
Yeah.
he's coming from. Because it was more
Mhm.
of like my work evoked an emotion, and hers was just more of like paint on a canvas. And I'm not taking anything
Mhm.
away from an expressionist
Of
artist,
course not.
but it's just
Mhm.
like when you can't speak of your own work, how can you expect someone else to? It's almost like I just made it, you interpret it. And it's like, do you like now, does that still hold value with people? If someone's coming in and they're like, oh,
Mm.
okay, well, it'll make a nice hallway piece. Like if
Yeah.
that's what you're going for, then cool. But if you're like me, I just go for to create an emotion, to make people think, to
Mm.
make people wonder. And if I sell, cool. If I don't, it doesn't affect me, because I'm creating
Mhm.
artwork to more inform people, to get them to think. And I think that's
Yeah.
what makes my work different from many other artists that I had shown with in like a partnered gallery like that. It was just like many
Yes.
people wanted to show with me because word of mouth was, this guy's creating something different. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so, and then they would be like, well, I want that crowd, because I purposely always
Mhm.
chose the back part of the gallery. Why? Because I always wanted people to just be in that space. I didn't want you to just
Yeah.
walk through. So it's like all my moves were intentional versus someone
Yeah.
that's just like, put me in the front, I want everybody to see me. I'm like, put me in the back and watch people's reaction.
But I mean, it's kind of like, so I took two things away from that statement. the interpretation, you
Yeah.
know, it does it take, and this is a question and a statement. Um, does it take someone who relates to the artist to understand how to curate that artist into the proper space? And when I mean by relating to the artist as a relationship, I mean like, does 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 a black artist always need to have a black curator? Does a black
No.
artist that they need to always explain their work in terms of African American, quote unquote.
Hmm.
In in times, I think that it is truly necessary.
Right.
It is truly necessary to have that curator be able to understand the subtleties.
Yes.
One of the Instagram hot shots, I like to call them, Kev on stage. He had posted something where "you straight" could mean 8 different things, in the black community if
Right.
said with a different tone. I look at the availability of black curators that way, to where they can see your work in ways that maybe
Hmm.
you might not have even been able to see it. And I agree with that for Latinx curators,
Yes.
Asian curators, and any other race, religion, or creed, because there's those intricacies that
Yeah.
they're able to point out. And I think that's very key. I mean, even deeper than what research can bring, because you actually live these things.
Right.
Um, the other thing I thought was really interesting, you said, is that I know a lot of artists when they do group shows, especially African American artists, they like to choose the back. Um, is it and it's because of that meeting spot. I think it's really understood, especially in like fairs,
Hmm.
and open settings and group shows, that people will usually just walk by,
Yeah.
the beginning works, and don't really take their time with it, to where being in the back, you have a stopping point,
Yes.
for them to
Yes.
actually relax. And that's actually pretty brilliant. And
Yeah.
good curators understand that. So,
Hmm.
how did you see yourself in your work? And even for the curator, how were you able to, bring that type of, I guess, ideation into the display of the work, or encourage them to do those type of things?
Well, for that, it was more of like it was kind of like a choice, but I
Yeah.
always knew, even through grad school, having conversation about shows and group shows. So I kind of had a little back information on how things work and how people
Hmm.
flow through galleries and having those conversations. So that was one, I kind of had a leg up with that information, but also for me, um my work is very much supposed to be consuming. Like you consume my work, like it's
Yeah.
street signs, you consume those, like you read them, you visualize them, you take them down, you paint on them, you
Hmm.
tag them, you sticker them. But these pieces were larger than normal street signs, so I wanted
Yeah.
them to be almost eye level with you, so you had to move your body to kind of, wait, what is it saying, to get that,
Hmm.
to for you to be like, oh, okay, I see what it is. And so for me, I knew that if people were walking through, they're not stopping.
Yeah.
And for my
Yeah.
work, I wanted you to stop because the message was part of the reason you're coming there, is
The reason.
because you're going to go there and the message is the reason. It wasn't just like happenstance, just walk through. It was more of like, oh, there's a story to tell. And I think that's how I create, is based off of a story. Like I have to find one central theme. And then once I found that theme, it was like, boom. And I think what helped the
Yeah.
curator too was that I explained it to them and they were like,
Yeah.
oh, wow. And then once I
Yeah.
explained it
Yeah.
to them, they were like, are you sure you want to? And I was like, yeah. I was like, I'm totally. And they were like, what if you don't? And I'm like, it's totally fine. I'm making
Yeah.
this
Like,
so
it's
people
good.
can interact with it. And so I
Yeah.
think having that, the confidence is one, is you have to
Hmm.
know that not everybody's going to mess with your work. Not everybody's going to like it. Some people are going to find it offensive. And for me, I was totally okay with that. I just embraced the fact that I was getting this story out and getting this part of my my blackness out that I had to get out,
Yeah.
that publicly wasn't expressed, but it was a very heated time in our culture. So it just so happened that I had it in a sketchbook, that I had these ideas down, and now I had the perfect timing in place to express it. So that right
Express.
there
Yeah.
was super major, that I was just like, I would say it's timing, I would say
Mm-hmm.
it's knowing the gallery, and then I would also say is being able to talk about it, showing the
Yeah.
gallerists beforehand so they know what's coming in. It's not like happenstance that you just show up and, oh, I don't know what these pieces are. And it's like, no. And
Yeah.
then the other thing that was stressed to me huge was make sure your work relates to your artist statement.
Yes.
That was
Most
huge, because
definitely.
people pick up that paper sometimes and they read that artist statement. If they look at your work and read that artist statement, it don't match, on to the next.
On to
So
the
it's
next.
right. So it was just understanding to make sure all that stuff connected.
For sure. And to, add into that with a little bit of research that we did, like one article that we had in the notes from the Rob report, it talks about that diversity in storytelling,
Yes.
and we all know from 2020 up until now, institutions, or even before 2020, but it really kicked off during 2020, that institutions have let's just say, an issue um, with
Yeah.
the hiring of African Americans, people of color in general, and not necessarily just people of color, but Black men, in decision making positions.
Mm-hmm.
One of the article title that we were looking at is like, art museums said they were committed to diversity. Black curators are encountering a more complicated reality. I
Right.
think that title is so apropos,
Mm-hmm.
not only for LA, but the global art world, because there are so many more hurdles, it seems,
Yeah.
to getting into an institution, to the point of full on detraction. Um, and it's not because of the people not being educated, because the folks, including myself, I throw myself in there, but a lot of great Black men curators and potential have the paperwork and the experience to boot, but they're not
Mm.
getting past this complication. What do you think about that?
Mm. It's tough for me to speak on it because, well, actually, I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I'm more 50-50
Hmm.
on it than anything. It's because, one, I just think we're not, I don't want to say we're not out there, because that would be very ignorant of me to say that.
Yeah.
But I think that I feel like if we kind of have that imposter syndrome, like if we approach this and we don't get it, it's like, damn. But it's like if we approach it and we get it, it's like, oh, this is amazing. So it's like I'm
Mm.
kind of in that I don't know stage, because
Hmm.
I haven't encountered many of us as curators in gallery spaces. So I'm kind
Yeah.
of in that gray space of like that gray area. But I wanted to ask you that, being a gallerist,
Hmm.
um, and dealing with artists and dealing with um, shows and putting things together, what is your take on how people um, accept you or see how you're represented? How do people accept that or accept you when they see you coming?
That's I can only speak from, my, I guess, my view of their view. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I would say, like, majority of the Black people, the Black community in the art world, they know I know my job, and they respect me for that. Even the Black folks in the community that don't know me, like, the approach is more of investigation,
Mm-hmm.
seeing who I am. And then once you have a conversation, like we spoke about earlier, you get a chance to actually see and hear someone speak their thoughts. It's more of a, okay, this guy can, he at least is on the cusp of knowing what he's talking about. Maybe they can't verify because they don't have the education or background, whatever it is. But it sounds good to them. Let's just say that. Um, there's other folks that, you know, I get very weird looks from, because I purposely don't dress the part in the art world. I think that's a key to me. I guess my little protest of, just accept me for who I am. Skinny black kid who loves art, knows what he's talking about. Um, appreciate me for that. I don't need to fit in your box of, whatever to do my job. You know what I
Now,
mean?
yes, yes, absolutely. But let me ask you this. Now,
Yeah.
they always say dress for the role you want. You do
Yeah.
you think now do you think that you staying true to you is a benefit or a hindrance in the bigger zeitgeist of like gallerists trying to become a head gallerist at the MoMA, the Broad, all these big name places? Like, do you think that that's a problem, or will become a problem?
It could possibly be. I'm not too naive to, to think that, because, we live in a city where, you know, people look at, your labels and things like that, as a sign of progress or a
Uh-huh.
sign of wealth or activity, I should say, because it's a
Right,
lot of just activity. It might not even be movement, but just
right.
activity. Um, but there's that sense of the misinterpretation. There we go again with the interpretation. There's someone that can be a well-dressed fool. You,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
And we have a lot of people who are in the art world that lend their program, their artists, artworks to well-dressed fools who talk a great game. I would rather you not look at the labels I have on and pay attention to what's coming out my mouth. I don't want what I have on to distract you. Um,
Mhm.
and I
But I
guess,
think
yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, no, no. But I was gonna say, but I think for the space,
Hmm.
don't you think it requires it that you have to dress that part for the
Yeah, I
space?
mean, and for you make a great example for the spaces that I am that require that amount of dress, I
Mm-hmm.
do.
Gotcha.
But if I'm going to enjoy an art show and just look at art, I'm
Yeah,
not there to impress. You know
gotcha.
what I mean? And I think that's where the difference for me is, because a lot of people look at, you know, art gallery openings and exhibition openings as a moment to impress. I'm
Right.
looking at it as a moment to view the damn art. I just want to see the artwork. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not
Yeah, yeah,
there,
yeah.
like if I want to sit and, meet and greet and do all of that, I can try to set up a meeting, or we can set up a time to talk, and I can
Hmm.
look the part when I walk into your office and check all the boxes, whatever that, requires for that, position.
Mm-hmm.
But, someone just going out to enjoy art shouldn't be held up to a standard,
Right.
when it comes to that. And I don't think that people are just out and about judging people. I mean, well, some of them do, but I do think they take those impressions,
Hmm.
and the impressions of you of others into a
Hmm.
lot of the hiring process considerations, especially for individuals of color.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
kind of what it is with that. Um, we've also seen the things where, you know, the heightened level of awareness with certain things, like, um
Yeah.
what's an example? I don't know, you could have had a bad show.
Mm.
And someone, non-black, it's like, well, they just had a bad show. The next one would be good. But you have someone say, "Oh man, that show was horrible. Like, I don't know if you
Yeah.
ever go there," but it's like it's just always a little bit extra on there. So I mean, I only, find that, hilarious. But it goes to
Yeah.
it. It goes to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
adding into that, as we, continue our, jump off a topic with a bunch of things, it just says so much we want to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in those findings, adding on to your earlier findings about education,
Mm.
the Mellon Foundation found that 2% of curators were black, in 2015, and then they came back 3 years later in 2018, and it increased 4%, or increased, sorry, to 4%. So if we're looking at that and we're judging that, it's going on 2023. So we can, let's say, it's maybe what, 5.5%, possibly 6%. We have to get exact numbers, but what do you think has changed in that time period?
Um, man, I have a lot has changed in that time period. That rush for inclusivity was huge during this pandemic. We saw a lot of injustices, and I feel like a lot
Hmm.
of um, companies and businesses and corporations were like, "Yo, we don't want to look like that. We're not that. So we need to put
Yeah.
these people in these positions so we can show them." And I think what it that's I hate to say that something so drastic that happened during 2020 had to be
Hmm.
the motivating factor for all these such increase in black hires into these like normally elite places that
Hmm.
we can submit an application to and wouldn't even get looked at. So I
Facts.
just I think that played a large role into it, just so they can just be like, hey, we're inclusive. You
Hmm.
can't say we're not. Like one of the top leads here is black, and so I just feel like that was the driving force to me. That's
Yeah.
my take on it, because it's just um you can see it, it's evident. It's just like one of the things I had shared with you prior was the reason why I wanted to become a professor was because I wanted to see students who look like me come after these
Hmm.
professions. Because it's like growing up,
Yes.
I always loved art, but I never had an art professor that looked like me. Never.
Me
I
neither.
and it's not a bad thing, but it was just like when I want to get to there because I know I can help a student who is looking for someone. Even if I might get that student 20 or 30 years later. I don't know when I'll have those students in my class. I want
Hmm.
them to be like, yo, I feel seen, I feel represented. I feel like I don't have to like do a deep dive into like expressing who I am. It's like
Hmm.
I already know who you are culturally. And
Yeah.
I think that was like that's the driving force of why I chose to become a professor and go get my MFA, is because I want representation in the classroom, because I feel
Yes.
that um,
Yes.
we have talented people out there. I have talented students out there, people of color, and I want them to know
Hmm.
that like your story is powerful and you deserve
Very.
to have a space where someone is hearing you, like
Yes.
active listening, not just, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
No, active
E-
listening. And so
Active.
yeah, so I feel that that to me was like a very big draw to me to become a professor. It's like, and I've
Yeah.
had school at all three levels, from high
Hmm.
school to junior college to grad school, and I still didn't have representation of me in the classroom. So I just feel
Yeah.
that um, it's totally okay for students and people of color to be in these positions, because not only are we qualified for it, but we're bringing
Yeah.
something different. We're bringing something, our skill set is different, our language is different, but
Yes.
also um, I think our take on art is a different lens. It's not the traditional lens
Perspective.
of how we do it, because it's just like my first introduction to art was graffiti. I
Hmm.
come across a student who wants to take my graphic design class in college, I can show him like, yo, this is how this can benefit what you're doing on
Hmm.
paper to what you're doing on the computer. Like, let me show you how to
Exactly.
vectorize this stuff so you can create your own typeface. Let me show you how
Hmm.
to let me show you how to use Pathfinder so you can blend and merge shapes. So you can take these
Hmm.
characters that you draw and potentially get them to 2D and then going into 3D and having your own little, what is that? I think it's Bunko, not Bunko, the little toys that they make.
Oh, the
Um,
Funkos.
the Funkos, yeah. It's like you can
Yeah.
be doing that. And it's like I want them to feel that like the skill set that they have is so
Mm-hmm.
valuable because you're not traditionally taught. You can't be traditionally
Yes.
taught graffiti. You literally
Yeah.
have to sit there and practice and draw and
Practice.
draw and
Yeah.
draw and draw. And it's like you only get better by what? Going out and doing it. So
Going
it's
out.
just like
Yeah.
I feel that that's a very unique skill, and I just want those students to come in and take my class. I want them to be like, "Yo, Professor
Mm-hmm.
Robinson, dope. He knows his stuff.
Yeah.
Like, dude has a wealth of knowledge. Like, he'll help you out." And I want that to happen for these kids because it's like I've always said to my other students, I was like, you may not understand or get why you're doing these assignments, but guess what? There's going to come a time where you're going to run across something and you're going to be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay,
Like, yeah, it's
yeah,
gonna hit.
it's
It's
going
gonna
to
click.
hit. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, yes. So I was
Yeah.
just like, man, that's the reason. I just felt like the representation for me, I just wanted that there. I wanted that to
Yeah.
be there.
And the same for me, as a curator. I think, what you said was very, very important. You know, for the same reason, like there's artists, and potential curators out there that, will send a DM or will ask, hey, I'm working on a show, can you give me some idea
Hmm.
about this and that? Or I'm trying to pitch to this collection. And it's very much an honor, to be asked these questions
Yeah.
and to be able to be put in these positions to allow someone to figure out where their direction is, inside of their project. And I
Hmm.
think, you know going for these positions that seem almost unattainable, is, I guess my contribution. I mean, of course we contribute in many ways, creative wise and
Right.
admin wise and all that, to this art, extravaganza, or this universe
Hmm.
that we're a part of. But, getting one of those jobs to have someone that looks like the artists that are trying to get in that institution in a front face, it allows for comfortability.
Yes.
It adds a level of hope.
Yes.
Um, and it also, it drops in that, that level of stewardship, to where you
Hmm.
feel like someone's actually, that they have an ear and an eye out for you.
Right.
um because, there's a lot of thinking that, when we go to these institutions, there's someone non-black choosing all the black stuff, or vice versa, or somebody non-black or non-person of color, whatever, just chooses everything. There's no consensus on what's being shown. um
Yeah.
to diversify that staff verifies that.
Hmm.
It allows people to know that, okay, I know that 5 different walks of life of people has taken a look at this show, and has added their 2 cents or whatever to it. I want to be one of those people that adds the 2 cents. I want there to be other people that come in and feel that they can add more to that, to
Yes.
build a dollar. You know what I mean? You get
Yeah.
enough cents in there, you build a dollar's worth. And
Hmm.
that's where that finance comes into play. Because if you don't have curators of color in these positions, um they're not able to move or make any real decisions to move any money or anything of those, type of resources, in the way of communities that are needed, that are
Yes.
needy, I'm saying. um it's important, and I've had it's funny, it's a quick story. I had a talk with a friend earlier, and we were going back and forth about, he's a big advocate, like as we all are, of, create your own
Hmm.
spaces. If you create your own space, you won't have to deal with that. And I'm like, well, yeah, you will. Because, as a
Yeah.
gallerist, one of your main goals is placing your artists into a collection, specifically a museum collection or a notable collection. And if
Right.
no one, especially a black artist, if there's no one to help steward or shepherd that,
Hmm.
artwork or this artist into that collection, do they really believe that their work's going to be treated fairly?
No.
And that's the importance of having
Hmm.
someone as a professor, being able to talk to that experience, having someone that looks like them as a curator, as a director of a museum, as a lead artist,
Yeah.
as the agent, as whatever. The sister, Jaya Thomas, who runs diverse representation,
Hmm.
that talks about, highlighting black professionals in the entertainment industry. does a great job of that. And I'm
Hmm.
hoping that we could have something like that in the art world too, because black
Yeah.
voices, specifically black male voices, are becoming extinct.
Yeah. In the art world, yeah. I mean, unless you're like one of the top blue chips that people normally know by name, can see
Yeah.
easily in every collection. Yeah, I believe it.
But I mean, how many of them are even in American institutions?
Mm,
Like how many actual, real curatorial brothers, and I'm
mm,
sure there's some out there. Like, and I'm just looking, in the LA and the New Yorks. Um, one brother that I remember, or actually two, one is still on this earth with us and one is passed. And, the one that passed, rest in peace to Cecil Ferguson,
mhm.
who was a curator at LACMA for years. And a lot of the Black arts community know and love Cecil because of the great work that he's been able to provide over the years and provide opportunities for folks. And the other is Franklin Sermons, um, good brother who's a pretty great curator who's now at the Perez Art Museum in Miami.
Mm.
Um, but it seems that these institutions in LA only allow a specific number of black male curators in the city at a time.
So with that being said, let me ask you this: would you think it should be taken upon the curator to bring in those people so that he could possibly have that type of team around him, or do you think it's the institution that's not letting them? Because my thought is, this is my thought
Mm,
process for this, is more of like, um, so Cecil, what if he
mm-hmm,
had an assistant that knew
mm-hmm,
the way he thought, the knew the way he picked pieces, the knew the way he talked, and he just happened to be a black male? Like,
mm-hmm.
do you see how, like, I think that would have probably helped, like, keeping that same energy? Or do you think it's more of the galleries just being like, you know, we'll find someone, you know what I mean, we'll pick,
Yeah,
versus that
I
other
think
side?
I think it's I think all of those are considered. I mean, you have to look at that to where it's like, did the museum want to do a regime change,
Mm.
after, that happens to where they want to clean out the old closet and, put up a new
Yeah.
door.
Yeah.
Um, we had the things where like, LA is expensive city, would the assistant be offered more money before he has the opportunity to even take the role,
uh, yeah, I see
of
what you
that.
mean. Yeah.
And then also, there could be the opportunity of, we've seen this a couple of times in a couple of our museums to where that assistant will end up being there for 10, 15 years and hasn't moved a bit, and in a lot of
Yeah.
cases have been demoted, because
Right.
they're part of an older regime or because they don't have someone like a Cecil Wood to speak for them, to, speak to
Yeah.
their attributes and things like that. Because, we live in a very spoken for culture, in
Yeah.
Los Angeles art world, um, to where I think it's both, 50-50 on that. The
Hmm.
institutions are not going to allow that because that gives, their staff, a level of control, especially like that they don't want. Black males, they don't have much decision making power in these institutions to begin with. Um, and also, I think the curator, especially the professional curator, not a lot of them have time to train. They don't have time to make sure that you're up to speed because they're walking on thin ice themselves. They have to make sure
Yeah.
that everything that they present is high key. You know what I mean? Like that's a very tough position, I would think, to be in, you know?
Yeah, I can see that, but I was just it was just the thought of like the apprentice, like having an apprentice when
Oh
the
yeah.
master's gone, the apprentice can literally mimic,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so
that happens in foundations and things like that.
mhm,
Because in a foundation, it's more like especially like a family foundation,
right, right,
like
right, right,
or we look at something like the Lakers. The Bus
yeah,
family is going to always run the Lakers. Somebody from the Bus family will always be at the top. You know, Jerry Buss created a situation to where someone in the family will always have that.
Yeah.
In the museum situation, institution, that's not guaranteed. We know as Americans, we cannot pass our kids down our jobs. We know that for sure. That's why, creating businesses is
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
main thing. So yeah, that's that one.
Yes.
Man, it's so as we keep going on, we want to let's give one more topic, point onto this story and then start to transition. Um, why are there so few black full-time art historians? So we've talked about educators, we've talked about curators. What's up with the people collecting our history? Why is there so few of us? Or are we dealing with the same issue to where they're just outside trying to knock on the door to get in?
I say it's both. I feel like it's
Hmm.
both. I feel that they are there knocking on the door ready to get in. But the other point is that when I read that, I was kind of like, well, could it be that they don't want us to tell our story because we might bring up some of the things that weren't nice, that weren't said nicely about us, or that weren't portrayed nicely about us? Like
But
we
that's in the
can
artwork, right? That's in the
it
artwork
is,
sometimes
but
anyway.
sometimes you know how people skate that ice, you know, like
Yes.
there's
Yes.
the way a black person would verbalize it versus someone else would be like, hey, this was during this time with this and this was during a sad time in our period, but look at this. And it's like there's two
Hmm.
different spectrums of how you could view this. And
Yes.
I think they're afraid of uh that truth getting out. To me,
Mm.
that's me. I think it's
Hmm.
a because it's like if you look at a lot of black art, it's just like that story is strong, and it is
Hmm.
and it's heavy. And I think that many gallerists or galleries don't want to take that deep dive because it might turn off the people that have this.
Hmm.
So they
Oh
want to
yeah.
keep it, to the place where this still comes in so that they
Hmm.
don't lose, they don't
That
lose
money.
the money and the roof on the place. So I think
Yeah.
it's that, but also I that goes back to the professor thing because I don't see a
Yeah.
lot of us taking fine art classes or doing the
Mm.
curator classes or art history classes. I don't see it. And maybe,
Hmm.
you know, my campuses are smaller, but it's just I don't see it. And I don't see that as a glorified or a high paying position because now it's shifted
Yeah.
to like the cost of living and is this job going to make
Yeah.
you money? So it's just like people are weighing those options like, hey, am I going to take this art curator position and maybe not get it and maybe have to be an intern or maybe have to be an apprentice, or can I
Hmm.
go get this business degree and I'm good? So it's just I feel
Yeah.
that that right there is that contentious battle of like both sides. It's a fight because there's a lot of weighing the scales. I think it's a
Hmm.
lot of weighing the scales, and I feel that it just comes down to the diligence of the person who really wants that position, to be honest. I think
Yeah.
if you really want it, you gotta bite down and go for it. And it's not going to
Yeah.
always be fair for you, you know what I mean? It's not going to always be
Super
in your
facts.
favor. So it's just like, are you willing to, eat rice for a month or 6 months so you can, you know make it to that position? So I
Facts.
that's something I think. So I'm on the line of it's both, but as I stated, it could go either way. What do you think?
I'm with you on that. Like and just looking at this the hyper allergic article, and this was an older article. I'm pretty sure, things have changed, hopefully for the better, but the cost of living to where people have to have careers that justify them living in certain areas,
Hmm.
that justify them being able to call what they do a career. You know, there's certain parents that still look at art as like, well, go get a real job. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's those still out there. Um, you know, but it was, you know, a professor, his name was Stephen Nelson at locally here. I need to look up and see if he's still here at UCLA, which hopefully he is.
Yes.
But he was, you know, about one of 6 African American full professors of art history in the US, you know, and all but one are male,
Right.
you know. So that's a really interesting switch over from curatorial,
Right.
because we know maybe 98% of the curators in institutions are female.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
like, where is the where make it make sense, you know, like do more men like history and women like curatorial? I don't, you know, make it make sense.
I just think as a people, we don't see the value. Us,
Mm,
people of
mm-hmm.
color, we don't see the value in it.
Yeah,
We have too many
yeah,
things fighting for our attention, and everything's a distraction. And so it's
yeah.
that's what it comes down to. I just think it's just we don't see the value in it. And until we see the value in our own work outside of, rapping and shooting a basketball and running a football, we're not going to put that much emphasis on
Do you think having, you know, our own spaces, you know, whether that being institutions like museums, you know, African American focused libraries or archives, do you think that does a actual duty to helping cull some of that in the industry, or do you think it'll ultimately exacerbate the problem, because there's not enough Black institutions for the amount of Black information, Black knowledge, and things like that that need to go in them?
it. Huh. Well, that's an
You know what I
interesting
mean?
one. Yeah, that's why I was like, that's
So, like, you can't just go, like, when people say, "Why don't you just create your own institution?" Okay, we've talked about finance, right? You know,
right.
but when we look at these numbers, the 3% and 2%, you know, we're not saying that all those people are just going to up and leave their jobs and come work for, you know, this organization now. You know,
Right.
so again, where if these graduates or these people in school, your students, the people I run into that want to be curators, start to abandon this career path, then how, you know, how beneficial are these spaces anyway when we don't have enough of us to pass them down? Like we talked about, you know, we're creating this generational conversation, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah. Hmm. Man, I wish I had an answer for that. I just think
Yeah.
that's like a loaded one. Like when you think about it, it's just I
It's
just
very
think it would
loaded.
it would just I think it would just crumble for us, to be honest. I think it would just the bottom will fall out. Um
Or you would
people
have to have non-people of color stewarding, you know, people or African Americans or
Yeah,
museums of color.
yeah. I think that too, but I honestly think the bottom would fall out because it would be like it would just be like trying to drive a car with one spark plug. You're not going to get far, man. It's like you're trying to drive there and get it to where it needs to be, and it's just going to keep breaking down and falling apart because you're missing all the key components that are super
Yeah.
important to make that car work. So it's like if you have the African American museums and you have all
Mhm.
these Black curators and you're not giving them the opportunity, you're going to fall those spots are going to fall apart, and then you're going to be
Mhm.
looking at yourself like, why aren't there any Black artists? And it's like, really? Look at your inbox. How many have
Yeah.
emailed you about coming to speak with you to show their art or doing a gallery visit or studio visit, or even the ones who are like, hey, I'm looking for an internship, and you just didn't even answer it. So it's just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it gets to that level where it's just like I personally think the bottom might fall out of it because there
Mhm.
there won't be anyone that'll be like, why try?
Yeah.
Of course, you'll have the ones
Yeah.
that are constantly like fighting for it. Like they will fight. We have fighters, and so I get that. But I'm just saying, it's just going to be like crazy, man. It's just, I think it'll be
So
crazy.
do we see so now let's combine practice, business, curatorial, education. Do we see HBCUs as a chance of potentially becoming these institutions that can steward the curatorial practices, house professorship, and archive and document Black contemporary, modern, and Renaissance art with a collection that can be protected, secured, and also displayed and distributed if need be for funding or things like that? Do you think that we have the uh, the power in that conglomerate to do that?
Yes, I feel we do, because we have the cultural icons talking about it. We have Jay-Z
Mm.
talking about
Hmm.
these Basquiat's and
Yeah.
Coons and all these different really big names, and it's just like, okay, we have that, and then we have Kehinde Wiley painting the first Black president's portraits. So it's like, okay,
Hmm.
we're getting that, and I just think that at the HBCUs, if there's a major push for it, I guarantee
Yeah,
you, like HBCUs are phenomenal. They have
they
huge
are.
donors that will pitch in for it to support it and get these like things secured for us culturally. And I feel that um, it can happen 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I feel that it can happen. And I feel that the pieces are in place. They just need to know. Like they need someone to come in here and say, hey, we have this piece and it's going up for sale. We can start collecting and we can build our own gallery on campus here and have it
Yeah.
become a national visiting spot. We just need to start
Hmm.
collecting it. We have endowments and we have things written up for this. And I feel that that'll be like major. I feel like that would be very major.
Yeah, I liken it to, having artwork in the home growing up.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
being able to go to a school that isn't necessarily an art school. Not, I'm pretty sure there's probably HBCU art schools and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but to have a school that's, like especially in Atlanta, like a Spelman or a Morehouse or
Yeah.
Clark, to have them with a major collection
Yeah.
says a lot, about the ability of, collecting while Black,
Yeah.
and what we're collecting and what we value, the images that we put up in our institutions, in our homes. To go back to something we all grew up on, the Cosby Show. Not thinking about, Bill Cosby aside, but just
Right.
the artworks that were in the home. That
Yeah.
was, besides graffiti in Philadelphia, that was my first introduction,
Mm.
to artwork. We didn't have art in the home besides, some little design attribute that my mom had over the couch to make it look good.
Right.
Later on came Beat Street, where you got to see
Yeah.
Ramo and Breakin' and see the five elements
Yeah.
of hip hop, which art is a part of.
Yeah.
Um, and being able to document those things. And, we talked about in the last conversation, Cornbread,
Yeah.
him being, the leader of, Graph and one of the originators of that Black man,
Yeah.
having him to speak, possibly to your class or possibly to
Yes.
other HBCUs. That importance and them focusing on these iconic characters and these iconic objects of importance does major to the students that go
Yes.
there. It makes
Yes.
them feel, man, if you walked into somewhere and you had a Basquiat, like a real Basquiat, that changes how you feel about your school.
Yeah. 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 That's why I said I believe that HBCUs can, and I feel that they should possibly get some of these Black curators to come there and write up these grants and reach out to these donors and
Hmm.
get and break ground on these uh, multi-million dollar art galleries that have the
Yes.
temperature temperature gauge and the white glove treatment. They need to have that
Hmm.
because then it's going to entice students to believe in art and to see the art and to just be like, oh, I can do this. And then not only do they get to get the lesson, they get the hands-on practice in a gallery. And I feel that that would be probably phenomenal to see that in the hub of the South, where the story for Black people started off terrible,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
now we're to the level where our universities have
Yeah.
the power to push out more creators
Yes.
based off of the guidelines that were set up by the other art galleries or the other creators. So it's like everything can be pushed out, everything can come from them, and it goes through Black hands. So it creates a
Yeah.
different conversation. That conversation is going to be powerful, and
Yeah.
I think it should happen through those. That'll be the
Yeah.
first. That would literally be the first step, I think.
I would love it personally if, when African painters and all that came to America, there could be a residency program for them at HBCUs,
Yep.
because that gives them a a prerequisite education of the subtle differences between Africans and African Americans.
Yes.
It's a cultural, like a medium, like to understand
Hmm.
how we are alike, how we differ, and how we can succeed in this world, because there are a lot of and we've seen it, a lot of African artists that come to America that don't know Black curators, don't
Right.
know other Black
Right.
artists.
Right.
They're associated with the crowd, and that could be white, Asian, whoever that
Yeah.
assisted them with getting over here. So there's a loyalty, in being to that, to where it's like, they understand that they're getting out of their situation to maybe a better situation, maybe not, but they're have an opportunity to make some money. So they're sticking with that, not
Yes.
knowing that there's a community that's waiting to embrace,
Yes.
them here.
Yes.
And I think that
Yes.
exchange will allow many of us to go over back to African countries to
Yeah.
dig into materials, techniques, because I
Absolutely.
mean that cultural exchange is necessary, and it
Yeah.
helps curatorial education, history,
Yeah.
all those things. um so yeah, like I think that's super, super, super important. Yeah, man. So overall, I think we covered a nice amount of ground with the ideas
Yes.
of
Yes, we did.
where it could potentially go. We've talked about educational, curatorial, historical, um you know brought up some numbers of
Yeah.
how it could, or how it has been, hoping to check the numbers in the future episode to see how it's changed, if it's changed, and then some ideas of where these institutions possibly could go, with HBCUs being that landing spot there, where I believe that they would be welcome with open arms.
Oh, most
Um,
definitely. Most definitely. I
uh,
have to agree.
but now we're gonna, as we're getting toward the drawdown of our first pilot episode, we're excited to bring a wonderful segment that we think will just grow and just become something beautiful, and a beautiful part of our show. We have our artist spotlight. Justin, give them a little background on an artist spotlight.
So, this was an idea we came up with because we felt that there were a lot of artists, fine artists at every level that, many people don't know because they're not in these big galleries. So we wanted to give them their flowers per se, even if they're dead or alive, because we just feel that it's very important that you guys know these names in art, because some of these people that we're going to speak about, either today and in the future to come, they are very pivotal people in their genre. And it's kind of like,
Yeah,
whoa, when you look them up, you're like, wow, these
yeah,
they really know it. They were honest. And I just felt that, actually we felt that it was very important for just our fan base to know who these people are. So that's why we are incorporating this artist spotlight.
most definitely, most definitely. And our artist spotlight for today is artist Valerie Maynard, who passed later last month. I'm sorry, around like September 19th. And this was some words from Alex Greenberger in Art News about her amazing career. For the past 6 decades, Maynard has been creating images of Black men and women that deified simplistic interpretations. She tackled a spread of issues from apartheid in South Africa to the status of Black artists in society, and she gained many admirers in the process. One was the writer Toni Morrison, who once penned the introduction for one of her print series titled Lost and Found. Morrison wrote that the medium is dream, but the power is magic. And I thought that
Man,
line was, amazing. So
magic.
please check out some of Valerie's work, and a beautiful rest in peace and a thank you to her for her contribution to what we know as the art world, because everybody has a voice, everybody has a hand in what we create today. Um, yeah, like
Right.
I'm happy to learn more about her too. I've always seen her works
Mm-hmm.
in a bunch of different places, but never really got a chance to know the person.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to reading up, more about her and,
Yeah.
picking out some favorite works.
Man, that's phenomenal. Yeah, you put me up on her. When you told me who she was, I looked into her work and I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. She was a force. Well, everyone, thank you guys for checking out our first
Yes.
podcast.
Yes.
My name is Justin Robinson,
And I'm Badir McCleary.
and this is the Art School Graduates Podcast.